What's up, everyone? Raphael Garcia here on the MMA Ratings Podcast. I'm back for another week with my partner Roy. We're going to be sitting here chatting about the sport of MMA, combat sports, and everything else that's going on in between. How are you doing today, Roy?
I'm doing pretty good, man. Pretty good. How are you?
I'm doing good. I'm doing well. Hold on one second. So, we our MMA vacation kind of ended this week, and we got back to work as we had a card last night. What did you think of UFC Fight Night?
Yeah, last night's card was pretty good. From the get-go, really, there were some great fights. What stood out for me early on was the fight between Tom Watson and Sam Alvey. I thought that was a really good fight. The two guys kind of gave it their all, and it was a pretty interesting fight. The undercard lived up to the hype. There was a lot of good name fighters on the undercard, and they all done pretty much well.
Yeah, I thought it was a very good card too. It was a lot better than I guess people seemed. These fight night cards have not been bad in my opinion. There's been some where I guess the makeup of them can be questionable at best, but I think that this was a pretty good card from top to bottom. I think the first thing that stood out to me was the Sarah McMahon Lauren Murphy fight. And, we talked about this last week, and I picked Sarah in the bout, but I believe I mentioned that Lauren shouldn't be overlooked at all. I thought she did well in this fight, and even though I wouldn't say it was necessarily controversial, this isn't like a Diego Sanchez split situation here, but it was definitely a close fight. And how did you look at it, Roy? Did you think Lauren had done enough to win, or was Sarah pretty much given the right win?
Yeah, I think Sarah deserved to win. I know Lauren Murphy outstriked her, but that was on the ground. She was on her back. The shots she was landing, for the most part, weren't very powerful. But Sarah McMahon controlled where the fight went. She held her own. She had dominant position for most of the fight, and she took down Lauren Murphy at will. Um, what I would say though is, as impressive Sarah McMahon was, I think Lauren Murphy was more so, considering she held her own against arguably a top five at the point in her UFC debut.
Let's see. What is your stance on winning a fight off of your back? Like, is this an example of a fighter who did enough? You said that you felt Sarah won just because Lauren was throwing more off of her back. Like, is there a point where a fighter can win a fight off of his or her back, or is it just a lost cause?
Well, I think there are a few interesting examples. Anthony Pettis against Clay Guida a few years ago. That one to me, I thought Anthony Pettis probably won that fight because he was throwing up triangles. He was constantly looking for submissions and attempting, whereas Guida wasn't advancing his position and was happy to just lay in his guard and not actually do anything. But last night, I don't think Murphy was close enough with any attempts or strikes. McMahon, even though she took her time, she was trying to advance her position. So that's the difference for the fight with me.
Okay, so I see what you're saying about this fight here. What do you think about Sarah McMahon? Is she someone who, you know, will be a champion in this weight class? Like, is she even the best fighter at bantamweight for the women if Ronda Rousey wasn't there?
I really don't know. I think she's a decent fighter. Her fight with Ronda Rousey showed that she might not take the best shot because, in all fairness, the shot that Rousey finished her with wasn't the best shot, wasn't the hardest shot, and I'm sure there's strikers in the division with a lot more power. I mean, if she got in a fight with Holly Holm, say, I don't think, just judging on last night's performance, I don't think McMahon's takedowns are explosive enough to cope with Holly Holm. I think Holly Holm could keep the distance and perhaps outbox her or even land kicks if she was willing to throw it against the Olympic wrestler.
Yeah, I'm curious to see what's next for Sarah. And I think I was looking at some of the other women in the weight class, and I would like to see her fight Leslie Smith. I don't know if you remember, Leslie's the one who knocked out Jessamine Duke last month, and I was impressed with her performance there. I was even impressed with her performance against Sarah Kaufman. I think she took that fight on like a week's notice or something like that. So when she has a full camp under her, she's looked good, even though her record may not be the best. So I would like to see that fight next up for Sarah. She should definitely have one more fight before she even placed back in the title talks. I feel like there are people ahead of her, even though the weight class hasn't had a whole lot of action right now.
Yeah, the problem with Sarah is going to be how quickly she was finished against Rousey, and it wasn't even an armbar. It was just it was a knockout. Well, a TKO to the knee to the body, but she really looked out of her realm in that fight. I think that's going to hinder her getting another title shot. Like she
Yeah.
doesn't sell a fight as well as Misha Tate. She doesn't sell a fight as well as any of the women in the division. Her skill was always her prevailing, motivator, and now that she's been beaten so handily by Rousey, I think it's going to be a while before we see another fight.
Do you think how do you think Sarah McMahon will do against Misha Tate?
Ooh, she should take Misha Tate. In a 3 round fight, I'd favour McMahon. I think Misha could take in 5 rounder because Misha's tough. She keeps coming forward. She'll always throw, and I think she could beat McMahon because Misha's kryptonite is being a hard hitter, and McMahon certainly isn't a hard hitter. So I think Misha could stand a chance. How about you?
But let me ask a question: how many doesn't McMahon have a couple of KOs to her record?
Yeah, but again, not against the level of strikers that Misha's faced. McMahon's, from what I can see, she's only won 2 fights by TKO. Um,
Oh, okay.
I don't think she would have what it takes to beat Misha Tate at this point. I think she has a lot of potential, but it's bizarre. When you see high level wrestlers go over to the UFC, the ones that are most successful are the ones that start to establish a jiu-jitsu game along with their wrestling. McMahon doesn't seem to have established a jiu-jitsu game to go with her wrestling. She seems content with holding position instead of looking for the finish.
Yeah, that's something I actually heard said about McMahon as well. Against Tate, I think I would lean towards taking Tate in that fight. She's a big 135er. She's I believe a lot taller than Sarah is as well. And as you mentioned, her striking is a lot better. And while she doesn't have the wrestling chops that Sarah does, I think she may be able to kind of keep herself off of her butt for long enough in the round that she would be able to score enough points to win a decision fight. So I can definitely agree with you on that one there, Roy.
Yeah. Next up was Junior Formiga v um, sorry, I got some
Zach
water
McCall.
stuck in my throat. Yeah, v Zach Mikowski. That fight was crazy just on the fact that obviously Formiga has beaten Chris Carrioso recently, and now he's fighting on the undercard uh, against Zach Mikowski. I think Formiga is probably top five in that division. His first 2 rounds last night looked absolutely spectacular. He made Mikowski, who's a tough guy, look somewhat mediocre. The third round wasn't his best. That being said, I think Formiga could well be a contender in that division. He has a lot of skill about him.
Yeah, I'm definitely. I was excited about this fight. I mentioned it last week. That this is my fight to watch, and I think it lived up. I thought Zach was going to be able to take the fight because Jussier hasn't looked like himself since he's been in the UFC. But he brought the game last night. He took Zach's back multiple times. He was able to kind of control the position at that point in time, which I think is important in MMA. When you get into dominant spots, how well are you at controlling them? And Formiga did exactly what he needed to do. It sucks that this fight was so far down on the docket last night because I think it had probably the most important of any fight last night for sure. Because the winner of this bout, especially if Zach won and if he won big time, he could have been the next guy to get a shot at Demetrius Johnson, or maybe even be put in like a title eliminator with either Ian McCall or John Lineker, just because that weight class, while it may not be enjoyed by a lot of MMA fans, it definitely has a lot of contenders. There's Mikowski, John Dotson, McCall, Lineker. Like there's guys up and down that weight class, and you could add Formiga to that group now too as well, who have put themselves in a position where they can definitely get a title shot, especially if and someone gets hurt.
Yeah, it was weird coming into the fight because Formiga was a 3-1 underdog, which I thought was crazy. I actually put some money down on him to get the win because that guy has been around for a long time now and he's proven to be a tough guy. I believe his losses are only against the top guys. I think John Dodson bet him, but like other than the big names, he hasn't lost. I think he has a lot of potential. As you said, he hasn't looked the same since he has come to the UFC, but he has showed shades of greatness. His jiu-jitsu is unbelievable. And just
Yeah, I definitely
go ahead.
enjoyed what I saw from him. last night. Who do you think is next for both of these guys?
It's an interesting one. I'd like to see John Lineker and Formiga fight, but to be honest with you, the way the division is now at this point, anything could happen. Uh, you know, Chris Carriasso could easily come out with a fight against Johnson, and if there was to be a late replacement, I would pick Formiga over anyone at the minute. I think he poses some interesting problems for Mighty Mouse. You know, Mighty Mouse is some way ahead of anyone else in the division, but I think just from a view perspective, I'd rather watch Formiga fight Mighty Mouse than watch Mighty Mouse fight Carriasso.
Yeah, I don't. If there was an injury in that fight, I don't think that they would put Formiga in there yet. I like the idea of John Lineker against Formiga, even though I think that he blows. If we see the Lineker that we saw with his fight against I, I, goodness, I Captain, whatever, however you say his name, Jesus, I can't even talk. Like, if we see that John come out and fight, I think he beats Formiga just because Formiga doesn't seem to like to get hit. We've seen him take some power shots since he's been in the UFC, and we've seen him go down from those. So again, I don't think that that's something that he would want to do at this point in time. How do you think he does against Ian McCall, though?
I actually think the opposite. I think Ian McCall beats him easily, but I think he beats John Lineker. I think Lineker would probably get taken down. Lineker, his condition isn't a strong point, whereas Formiga would be able to grind and probably get a submission out. I think his jiu-jitsu game's on another level compared to Lineker, so I think he'd get the win against Lineker, whereas I think Ian McCall on the feet would be too much for Formiga.
Yeah, Ian McCall and Jussier fought back in 2011, so it would be a rematch. And Ian McCall won that fight. He got the decision over 3 rounds, so that's a good talking point too as well. If that bout was to come up in the near future.
Yeah, I was trying to think who Formiga lost it off the top of my head. I remember that fight was in Taki Palace, wasn't it? Or I can't even pronounce that promotion's name, but they fought there. I remember watching that fight. Ian McCall's just a stud in that division. I think if it wasn't for his 2 previous fights against Mighty Mouse, he'd probably be getting the title shot now as well.
Yeah, I would definitely agree with you on that. What did you think of Thiago Tavares and Robbie Baraka?
Tavares has looked good. Tavares is an accomplished guy. He's been around the UFC for quite a while now, and he suffered some losses. But the guys who've beaten him have mainly been good grapplers. He's lost to Nurmagomedov bet him, and Shane Roller bet him. But if I remember correctly, that was a come from behind knockout, I think.
Yeah, it definitely was. He was whooping Shane Roller behind until he took that haymaker that just folded his face.
But without that fight, he's won. The only fight he's lost since 2008 is against Nurmagomedov. If you write off the Roller one as a upset match coming from behind upset, since then he's bet Manny Gamborian, Sam Stout, Spencer Fisher, Justin Salas, Pat Auden. He's bet a lot of good guys.
Yeah, and this was his featherweight debut as well, I believe. So it was a good bout for real. And Robbie Peralta, he was on a quiet little run of his own as well. So this is a good win for Tavares. This is a good use of these UFC Fight Night cards. They have guys like Thiago on here who have been doing well for a good little while, but no one kind of watching for them. The same thing with Robbie Peralta. And this gives them opportunity to kind of put some good wins together. And then the next thing you know, we're seeing them on Fox cards, we're seeing them on actual pay-per-views. So this is a good fight that kind of exemplifies why they have all these bouts on the calendar.
Yeah, that's definitely agreed. Next up was Sean Jordan v. Jack May. The heavyweights are never the most technical. For me, the fight wasn't great. I expected Jack May to actually clip Sean Jordan because Sean Jordan's chin hasn't been looking great as of late. But, despite some early promise, Jack May faltered and Sean Jordan got the victory, but I don't think either fighter really has much about him, and it just further shows how the UFC's heavyweight division is lacking behind the rest of the divisions in terms of skill.
Yeah, I'm surprised that Jack May was such a highly touted guy coming into the UFC. I've heard a lot about him from other outlets and other writers, but he just didn't look like the guy that was going to get the job done. He started out well against Sean Jordan, but Sean kind of just came from behind and he took the fight there. So I'm not really. I mean, I wouldn't be surprised if Jack May got cut, to be honest. Just because he hasn't kind of lived up to be the man. He's not who we thought he was. So if he was to get cut after these two losses, especially with there being such close proximity over this year, I wouldn't be surprised if he was to get cut from the organization. What do you really think about Sean Jordan? Is he someone worth watching at heavyweight, or is he like the next Pat Barry or Matt Mitrione?
Yeah, he's definitely a gatekeeper, and he got knocked out by Matt Mitrione, so it just shows how low level he is. Um, as much skill as he has, it's obviously limited, but he's been wasted at heavyweight. He just looks, fat, for want of a better phrase. He could definitely make 205. It's not even discernible muscle mass the guy has. He's just straight up fat and small. So I think he should drop a weight class maybe and see how he does from there.
How do you think he would do at 205?
I think he'd probably pose some problems for some guys. If his power translated, he could be into some good fights, and there's less chance of him getting knocked out with that division too. So I'd be more interested in seeing him take his next fight there.
Okay. I think that Sean's one of those gatekeeper type guys too as well. But if he moved down a weight class, I think he would kind of stay in that same group. He may be like a Ryan Bader, who we'll talk about later, or someone that kind of sticks out and doesn't really make it to like the top of the weight class, but he's someone that can be used to kind of fight these guys who are coming into the UFC and we're not really sure what we're going to get with them, like a Jack May. Speaking of someone who was coming into the UFC for the first time, Alan Jawan defeated Seth Paczynski last night with a sick KO. He came from behind too as well, because he almost got stopped a couple of times in this first round, but he was able to clip Seth and get him out of there. So what did you think of his first time stepping into the octagon?
Yeah, it was very impressive. When I first heard Valenjo being back down in 2012, I was promoting back in Ireland, and our middleweight champion needed a guy to go against, and I was in the process of trying to book Alan Joanna to fight him, but it fell apart. But from that point on, I knew the guy had a lot of skill. I knew it was just a matter of time before he made it to the UFC. He looked good. He's shown heart a lot in his early fights. He's a brown belt under Eddie Bravo, trains extensively down in King's MMA with Raphael Cordero. He's got a lot of skill about him. He gets hit a little bit too much. I don't like that fact. He's kind of done it a lot in many of his fights, but he seems to persevere, and I was impressed with him last night.
Yeah, it was definitely funny. Like you brought up the fact that he gets hit too much. He was a former male model, so you figure that he would do better at protecting his face. But doesn't seem too interested in that like he did last night. But he still pulled out the win. The way he's 70, I think that's a bad game plan. Because so many of these guys will be able to put you away if you allow them to touch you. So he's gonna have to figure out some way to kind of get his defense up and kind of deal with that. But it was a good win for him. Definitely a good KO come from behind win. He got himself a good highlight reel out of it. So I would like to see what's next for him down the line.
Yeah, I remember watching the fight Chinini Chikwani back at Taki Palace as well, actually. And he got caught that night with a kick to the body, and to me that fight showed his willingness to get into exchanges perhaps he shouldn't. I think to move forward he will need to try to be a little bit more elusive.
Yeah, no, I definitely agree with you there too. So let's continue going up the card, and we've already talked about I think like 3 come from behind fights from last night. Tim Bosch probably did it again. He probably had the best example of how to snatch away a loss. When it's coming your way. He did it once against Yushino. The same thing here last night when he got the win, when he knocked out Brad Tavares. So it's kind of like, what are we going to get with this guy? Because I thought Brad was going to take the fight here and get Tim sent from the UFC, but he again snatches away a win with vicious knockout. And it's kind of like I'm still here. He's going to be hanging around the middleweight division for a while, and this is a big win because Brad was someone who had captured a lot of attention with his recent win streak. So, what do you think about Tim Bosch? Is this the real Tim Bosch, or is he just going to be someone who's just hanging around, losing two, winning one, losing two, winning one.
Tim Bosch is an interesting character. His heart is amongst the best in the division, but his skills is just aren't. And when it comes up to the upper echelon of guys in that division, he's always going to get beaten. But against mid-level guys like Tavares, he's likely to come back. He never quits. I think his ceiling is obviously limited. I don't think he's ever going to be a champion. But there's some interesting fights for him. He's a very interesting guy to watch.
Yeah, I think he just kind of sticks around. Like I mentioned, winning one, probably losing two. I don't think he has too much time left in the promotion. What do you think about Brad Tavares? He's someone that I was kind of high on. I thought he was going to beat Yoel Romero as well, but he wasn't able to get the job done there. So, what do you think is next for both of these guys?
I think Brad Tavares is a very exciting fighter to watch. He's improved a lot as his career's gone by. There's not been many fights where he's not improved substantially. But last night he got caught. It's part of the process of becoming a top fighter. I think some fights you're going to lose. He's only 26. He's been beaten by Yoel Romero, who he's shown to be a serious prospect himself, and Tim Boach. He was looking comfortable in that fight until he got caught. So I feel it's part of the experience for him. I think he's going to come back stronger from this, and I think he definitely has a future within the division.
Yeah, I definitely hope he can turn it around, and this isn't like the wheels coming off. What do you think is next for Tim? Like, is he ever going to get a title shot? Like, is he someone that's going to be able to find his way back to the top up there, or is he just someone that's kind of just hanging out, taking up a roster spot?
Yeah, he's just going to be kind of a gatekeeper. I imagine he'll probably fight the winner of Francis Carmont v. Talis Ladies, maybe. That could be an interesting fight, but when it comes down to it, he's going to get beaten by the big guys in that division, and he should be used for more fun fights.
Yeah, I can definitely agree with you on that one there. So let's move up to the co-main event with Ross Pearson and Gray Maynard. And talk to me about that, Roy. What did you see from these two lightweights?
I think it was what Ross needed. It's the big name win that he deserved after being robbed against Diego Sanchez. For all the impressiveness I got from Pearson, it's so disappointing to see a fighter like Gray Maynard get knocked out again. Gray was great. His trilogy with Frank Yeager really reinvented the lightweight division, and I think in hindsight that's probably one of the best trilogies that the UFC's ever had. I think those fights took too much out of Gray, and it's sad to see because he was a top fighter. Going to that second fight against Frankie, a lot of people favoured him and expected him to get to win, but he's faltered, and since that fight he hasn't been the same, and it's sad to see.
Do you think it's time for him to hang him up? Because Dana White mentioned that he's going to talk to Gray Maynard about it coming off of his loss last night. Do you think it's time for him to call it quits, or does he still have some value in the sport?
If I was him, I'd call it quits. He's just getting hit too much. And it's not a sign that, not a good sign when your chin completely goes. His chin was never the best to begin with. It's just the fact that he's getting dropped so hard now, it's just really worrying. No one likes to see people get knocked out, especially in light of recent comments by, former fighters like Krzysztof Kaczynski about the damages he faces now in his earlier fights. So I personally like to see Gray hang him up. It's just sad in hindsight that that he never won the title. He came so close twice.
Yeah, if he was a couple of punches away or a few more seconds away from the second fight with Frankie, he probably have earned that title that he was always looking to win. Even in the third fight, he had Frankie hurt early, but he just wasn't able to put it together. So I agree. I think it's time for him to kind of walk away. And it's interesting because we're going to talk about two other fighters who have recently retired, and I think we may see Gray kind of deal with one of the situations with one guy with what Krzysztof Kaczynski is facing right now, but we'll be able to talk about that later on. So let's go to the main event. We have Ryan Bader against OSP in this fight here. What did you think about the way Ryan Bader was able to pull out a win last night?
I think, as you alluded to earlier on, Ryan Bader is better than most of the division, but he's just not quite top level. Against anyone who's not a top guy, Ryan Bader's going to do it. I think his wrestling's too much for a lot of guys, but I think what kind of went to it too is the fact that OSP doesn't have a training camp on the level that Ryan Bader does. OSP doesn't get to train with guys of that caliber on a daily basis, and I think that's really hindering OSP's development. I think he should look toward moving to a big team himself because I think he does have a lot of potential. I think he should make the move up to a big camp, and he could come back even stronger.
Okay, so do you think like will Ryan ever like that's the question I asked about Tim Bosch earlier? Will Ryan Bader ever get a title shot at light heavyweight, or is he like he's going to put together 3 wins and then get put in there with someone that's in the top 5 and get put out of there, or will he ever be able to break through, kind of get a shot against maybe a John Jones, a Daniel Cormier, or anyone like that?
Yeah, I don't think so. I don't think he'll ever get the title shot. He's been beaten by too many of the big guys. I actually favoured him going into his fight with John Jones a long time ago, and I don't know what I was thinking. I thought he had the more potential of the pair, which I was completely oblivious to because since that point, Ryan Bader has ceased to grow as a fighter. I think Ryan Bader, there's no one in the top 5 that he beats right now. His ceiling is limited. He's going to be that top 10, but not quite top 5 fighter.
And see, what's interesting is I remember that fight with John Jones and Ryan Bader. What was that in 2011? I don't know. Yeah, 2011, I believe, 2010. And I remember that fight and thinking to myself that this is a bad fight for John Jones because I felt the same way. I thought Ryan was going to be able to score a takedown and beat him up there, but we were both wrong. And man, Bader's looked good in some moments. Then he struggles in others. And to be honest, the loss to Glover Teixeira, I thought he was going to win that fight too as well. He had Glover hurt early, but he just didn't seem to want to stick to using his wrestling, which I thought he should, just kind of control the fight for 15 minutes. But he had Glover hurt, and then he got himself finished. So he's someone who I think will hang around the top 10 of light heavyweight, but I don't think he breaks through the top. Like right now, do you put him in there with Anthony Johnson right now, or do you put him in there with Alexander Gustafsson when he comes back, or what about like a Rashad Evans? Do you put him in there with that guy? Like who do you really put him in there with at 205 at the top of the weight class and expect him to get a win?
The problem is I don't think he will beat any of those guys you just mentioned. He will probably get faced up against perhaps Gustafsson. I'm not sure how Gustafsson's knee's doing, but with John Jones taking the fight against Daniel Cormier now looking set for January, Gustafsson might perhaps try and rush back for the October card in Sweden, which would make sense for him. And if that does happen, I'm sure Ryan Bader would be the opponent.
Yeah, we can definitely continue talking about that point later on because it's going to come up during our show today. But what do you think is next for OSP? Like how good of a fighter is he as well? Like, because he's another guy who's just coming into the sport, kind of growing as well. Do you think he's gonna will he turn a corner, or is this kind of like the highest point he'll get to?
If I was OSP, I'd be calling up Greg Jackson today to try to get up there to be a training partner for John Jones, because if the guy wants to improve, that's what he needs to do. He needs to go to the big camp. He can't be training and living in Tennessee, fighting with guys that are part-time fighters, amateurs, guys that aren't at the level. Whereas if he went up to somewhere like Greg Jackson's camp, he's bound to improve. If he's training with guys like, John Jones, he's going to keep on improving. Physically speaking, he has so much potential. I don't think his coaches are up to scratch. I think he needs to be with a big camp.
Where's he at right now? What team is he training with now?
He trains at home in Tennessee with, I believe, Knoxville MMA. I know he's trained a bit with Brian Stan in the past, but he's never really trained with the big teams.
Yeah, that's we've seen that be a turning point for so many different teams. So I can definitely agree with you there. So let's quick question about UFC Fight Night, Beta versus OSP. What was your highest and lowest ranked fight for the evening?
Oh, it's a hard one. Highest rated. That's a hard one. That really is a hard one. I guess maybe Tim Boach fight just for the excitement level. It was very excitement to watch. And if for my lowest, I'd go for the first fight of the night. That was pretty much a slow start to the action for me. What about you?
Yeah, I'll agree with your decision on the lowest fight, between Frankie and Nolan Tickman. So I'll give you that as the lowest rated fight. But the highest, I'll take the Ross Pearson and Gray Maynard, just because I thought Ross was going to win the fight, and I'm looking forward to seeing what's next from him. He's put together some good wins. Being from England as well, that'll give him a pretty good platform to get some promotion behind the UFC. So I'm looking forward to seeing what's next for the Englishman. After he got that big knockout over Gray Maynard.
Yeah, it's bizarre at Ross. For a long time, he was hyped a lot in England. He was regular for all the UFC's media events. But in recent years, he went over to Alliance. He's been seen less and less around the UK scene. I know for this fight, he took his camp in the UK, so maybe he's going to try to make a resurgence there. But it will be interesting. I expect him to feature heavily in the UFC's return to London in February or March next year.
Okay, yeah, I can definitely get behind you on that. Let's talk about these two cards that we have coming up this week. Is going to be a pretty busy weekend as we have two fight cards on Saturday. We have UFC Fight Night, Henderson versus Dos Anjos, and then UFC Fight Night, Michael Bisping versus Kung Lee. So let's talk about the Bisping and Lee card first, actually, because we were talking before we got our show started, and you said this one. You mentioned that both cards weren't interesting to you at all. Um, of the two, I think the Bisping Lee card is definitely it's the weaker of the two, and I use weaker with air quotes because I think the purpose of this card is to kind of feature some of these Chinese athletes. Of course, we may not be too familiar with them, but some of these fighters may be more popular on that side of the world, which is what the UFC is trying to do. They're trying to get their foothold in other countries, which is understandable because everybody spends money, and money is always going to be the same color everywhere. So this fight may not be or this card may not be exciting, but I still think it has some value. I'm looking forward to seeing Tyron Woodley and Dong Young Kim fight because this is an important match for both of them. Because right now, I don't think anyone's taking Dong Young Kim seriously as a welterweight contender, even though he's put together a very good run while being in the UFC. And the same goes for Tyron Woodley. He talks a good game. He talks himself up very well, but he hasn't gotten the big wins that he needs to when he needs to get them. So, what do you think about this card as a whole, and where is the value there?
For me, this fight is a segue for the UFC. The UFC has recently restructured its international operations. Mark Fisher was ahead of the Asian division of the UFC for a long time, but he's recently been let go by the promotion, and Gary Cook, who was in charge of Europe, has taken over. Well, he's taken over a global officer role. One of the main reasons that Mark Fisher was let go was because he couldn't secure an event on mainland China. Macau isn't really China. It's an island. It's like the Las Vegas of China. It's not really a mainland place, but yeah. So for me, this fight, this event in the whole is just kind of a segue to see if the UFC can build some popularity in China because it really has struggled. Just looking at the card, the main and the co-main are very solid, but the rest of the card is lacking quite a bit. There's guys on that card that would not be in the UFC if they weren't Asian. That's just the way it is. There's guys on that card that wouldn't get on most European shows. Skill-wise, they're just not good enough. It's the dilution is just shocking. Some of those guys really, really don't deserve a shot.
Let me ask you this then. Looking at the card, is there anyone you want to see? Like, is there anyone that you think, okay, this fighter might be a prospect worth watching, or would you just take everything from Tyron Woodley, Dong Young Kim, take those two and everything down, and you just throw them all out right now?
Alberto Mina could be a prospect, but again, his level of competition hasn't been great so far. He's 10-0, but he hasn't really fought a big name yet. His opponent, too, Shinzo Anzi, is decent, but again, he fought in King of the Cage and he got bet. So it's just how it is. There's a lot of guys that have somewhat padded records, but skill level, I really don't feel that they're UFC level. A lot of these guys would get bet in feed organizations to the UFC. If they fought in RFA or if they fought in Cage Warriors, I think these guys would be exposed. So it's more so luck on their part to get the big call.
What are your thoughts on Royston Lee? I feel like the UFC is trying to build this guy up very slowly. I think they see some value in him, and he's only 3-0, and I think that they're going to keep feeding him these fights over in China on guys that are basically coming into the sport early. What are your thoughts on him? Is he someone worth watching, or is he just someone that's been brought on because of where he's from?
Man, he's matched up against a guy who's 1-1 and hasn't fought in over a year. The UFC can feed him opponents to beat all they want, but at the end of the day, it's just a matter of time before he gets exposed and gets exposed badly, and it's going to reflect badly on the brand. Because the UFC's always prided itself on making the best fights, and this fight isn't the best fight by any stretch of the imagination. Royce Newey's opponent has
Okay, I can get with you on that.
yeah, Royce Newey's opponent has no place in the UFC.
What do you think about Roland Delorme? You think like he's lost two in a row, and he's fighting this weekend as well? Do you think he'll be able to get the win and stay in the UFC, or is this the last time we'll see him in the octagon?
It's a hard one. Roland Delorme showed so much promise, man. He put on some great fights early in his UFC career. I think it was his fight with Josh Ferguson that really stood out to me. That was a really great fight, as well as his fight with Nick Dennis. He's coming in here against another tough guy with a record that is very good. Delorme, I would expect to get the victory, and if he doesn't get the victory, obviously he'll be cut. Um, yeah, but it's going to be interesting to see how he does.
Okay, so let's look at the co-main event and the main event as well. Who are you taking between Woodley and Kim?
I expect Woodley would probably pull it off, but I think one of the big things that needs to be noted is the travelling abroad to fight. Travelling to China is going to take a lot out of guys. It happened for the first UFC event in Macau, and it happened as well with the ADCC in China as well. A lot of guys were just completely drained when they got there. This could well be the case for Woodley, whose cardio has been questionable throughout his career. Whereas Don Hyun Kim, he's obviously from that side of the world. I'm sure he's been training aptly. Stylistically, he could perhaps cause trouble for Tyrone Woodley in the later rounds.
What I'm interested in seeing is like Dong Young Kim's pacing. He puts on a hard pace from the very beginning, and both of these guys are known to get weathered throughout their fights. So it's kind of like who's going to gas first, and then what's going to happen. Woodley, he's been stopped before in the past, and Kim is kind of using that overwhelming style that Marquardt kind of used to put him away a while back. So, man, the smart person in me wants to pick Tyron Woodley, but the MMA fan in me wants to pick Dong Young Kim just because I want to see him put on a show like he's been doing as of late. But I want to go with Woodley as well. I just think he'll be able to do enough to get the victory next week.
Yeah, that should be interesting. How do you see Bisping v. Lee going?
I don't really care. I'm joking about that. I've never been a fan of Michael at all. I think he's a good fighter, but unfortunately he kind of goes lame duck when the camera is shining the most on him. And I think
Yeah.
this is a fight for him to win. He should defeat Kung Lee because he's been the more active fighter of the two. He's the younger fighter of the two, and he is very skilled. Kung Lee was very skilled. No, I'm going to say he still is. Just the fact that there's just too much time I think has gone by between his him being active. I just think that Bisping beats him. In my opinion, I think he'll win a decision here. I don't think he's going to stop Lee, but you know, I just don't think that this fight really has any value for Michael Bisping right now.
I think Bisping will finish him. I just rewatched Kung Lee v. Rich Franklin, and although Lee got the knockout, prior to that his footwork looked absolutely awful. He looked slow and he looked laboured. I really expect Bisping to go in there and take Lee down and grind him. I reckon he's going to finish him. It's going to look a lot like the Jason Miller fight. I think in the later rounds, Kung Lee's just going to tire out and get a knee to the body, and Bisping is just going to keep on top of him and get the ground and pound stoppage.
Yeah, it'll be a. I don't think it's going to be a very interesting fight. I think there'll be some flashes at the very beginning when Lee has the energy to get started. But once that maybe that second round comes and once he's weathered, I think it'll be like the Michael Bisping show from that point on.
Yeah, I think obviously Bisping's best days are behind him as well. Since his eye injury, as we spoke about before, he just hasn't been the same. I think Lee's a good fight for him. I think he'll probably win that fight. But quite honestly, I don't see why he'd continue fighting at this point. He's been beaten. Tim Kennedy dominated him. Vito Belfort knocked him out. Chael Sonnen beat him. There's not a lot left for him. He's far away from title contention. Perhaps, there was always talk of the big fight with Anderson Silva happening in the UK at some point. Maybe that could be possible after Anderson's fight with Nick Diaz. But other than that, I really don't see what else there is for Bisping. He's not going to win a title. He's just there. He's a big name without a big opponent to fight, really.
Yeah, it was he's on a downturn of he's on a downturn of his career at this point. I was surprised the way he got dominated by Tim Kennedy, but as I mentioned, I think his last big showing was when he nearly defeated Chael Sonnen. I thought he won that fight as well. That was his moment, but he's never been able to get over that hump. So again, I think this fight doesn't really have a lot of value for him other than being a payday, but he'll get the win and he'll probably get the win big.
Yeah, I agree.
So let's continue moving forward and let's look at UFC Fight Night. Who's headlining the other one? UFC Fight Night, Henderson and Dos Anjos. I think this card has some more value definitely than an event in Macau. Is there anything that I'll let you start? Like, what are you looking forward to with this card next Saturday?
Oh man, there is a lot of interesting fights. Just excitement wise, I think the most exciting fight has to be the Jordan Mein v Mike Pyle fight. In my head, I can't see how that fight won't provide fireworks.
Is there anything else that you are looking forward to?
I'm interested to see how Max Holloway does against Marsad Bektic, if I pronounced that right. That should be an interesting fight. Bektic had a lot of hype going into him, as has Max Holloway, so that could well prove to be an interesting fight.
I can agree with you on that. I looked at this card, and there's a couple things that definitely stood out to me. First off, I want to see Aaron Phillips. I think he looked good the first time he fought earlier this year. Even though he didn't get the win, I'm interested in seeing how he looks coming out for his second UFC bout this Saturday. Ben Saunders is coming back to the UFC as well after being in on the regional circuit and Bellator for the past few years. He's coming back to the octagon, and I think he has that that exciting style where he can earn himself some bonus checks while fighting in the octagon. I don't think he'll get anywhere near a title shot, but he'll definitely put together some highlight reel fight for his last run. I think it's kind of his last run in the sport as well too. I'm looking forward to Wilson Hayes as well to see him and Neil Magny. I think these are two guys that look very good. They're also pretty good runs, so I'm looking forward to seeing what they do. As well as Max Holloway. I'm interested in how good this guy is. He's praised for being an exciting fighter, which is great, but he hasn't put together like the biggest run at this point in time. And we always forget just how young this guy is. So I'm looking forward to seeing what he can do next. And then also Francis Carmel and Chalice. Like this on paper, this sounds like probably the most boring fight the UFC could have put together. Just because the way the mainstream fan looks at the sport, but it is very important for both of these guys. And then you got the main event with Henderson and Dos Anjos. So let's start there. Who do you think takes that fight?
Yeah, Benson Henderson, 100%. That guy was a dominant champion. He lost one fight. Since then, he's looked good. I know a lot of people said Josh Thompson bet him, but that was a very close fight. And Josh Thompson is a very good fighter. I think Benson beats pretty much anyone in that division right now.
So you think he defeats anyone in the division right now, but so you don't see Javier being able to do anything in this fight. I'm going to lean towards taking Henderson just because he is the better point scorer of the two, and God, I hate using that term as well. But over a 25-minute fight, I think he has the better ability to kind of win the scrambles and win the aspects of the fight that will sway the judges. But on the other hand, Raphael isn't bad at anything that will be needed in this fight. His striking's gotten a lot better. His wrestling's gotten a lot better as well too. Those are two aspects of his game that were always kind of like the weakest. but he's looked better in both of those categories in every outing. And then if the fight does go down to the ground, he can control as well in those scrambles, and I think he can land in some good positions. So I don't think this is as much of a wash for Henderson as everyone's probably going to pick it out to be.
I honestly think Benson will beat him, and he could well finish him. Over a 5 round fight, Dos Anjos I think will falter eventually. Henderson's pressure's a lot. It's hard to take for a lot of guys. I think Dos Anjos hasn't faced a guy like Henderson. I know he's coming off a loss against Nurmagomedov, but bar that, he's never faced an opponent quite on Benson Henderson's level. I think Benson will expose him badly.
You want to put a bet on it?
Yeah, I'm well for that.
Okay, I say we put a bet on it. Let's ask Twitter and see what everyone listening wants to see us put a bet on it. But okay, so the bet is, I'm not saying that Dos Anjos is going to win. That's not what I'm saying. I'm saying that it's not going to be a wash.
I'm saying that Benson Henderson will win at least 4 rounds.
Ooh, at least 4. Oh man. Okay. All right. I'm gonna take that bet. I'm gonna take that Dos Anjos will win at least 2 rounds of the main event this coming Saturday.
No chance, man. No chance.
Really, no chance at all.
No, it's going to be a lockout. Benson's going to dominate throughout.
Oh, come on. All right. I'm taking that bet.
I look forward to
let's go
next week.
If I lose, I'm going to be pissed, but I'm definitely taking that bet. I'm going to give Dos Anjos at least 2 rounds for sure. So let's talk about some of the other news. Yeah, for sure. Let's talk about some of the other news that we've seen from this week. And of course, the biggest thing was UFC 178 getting changed to because of John Jones' injury. What was your reaction to that, Roy?
That was just like the worst fight news possible. I think the whole MMA community had finally gotten behind this one fight. Everyone wanted to see it. The casual fans wanted to see it. The hardcore fans wanted to see it. And then just in like one fell swoop, everyone's hopes and dreams were shattered. It's just so bad for the sport. Everyone wanted to see that fight, and the fight could have made so much hype toward the latter portion of this year for the UFC. It's just such an anticlimax that the fight's been delayed for so long.
Yeah, it definitely hurts. And what's crazy is like this is hurting 2 events. Of course, it's hurting UFC 178. Talk MMA, his name's Diz on Twitter, was joking that this fight card has gone from probably like 6 or I think he said 800 pay-per-view buys to about 200 now because the main event has been switched now to Demetrius Johnson versus Chris Carriasso, and that's probably, other than canceling the show, that's the worst situation for the UFC because we know already that Johnson isn't a pay-per-view draw. Even though this has a very solid card behind him, it'll be unfortunate because I would, maybe 200, 250, 300 buys at the most. But if it hits 300,000 buys, I think that's more because of the rest of the card rather than the main event itself. And then it also hurts UFC 177 because it's pulling off a co-main event that kind of added some value to that event. Two title defenses. Would have made that bout made that whole card more interesting, but now both of them are actually weaker going forward.
Yeah, just for me, UFC 178 was such a great card. There's so much hype behind it. Now it's just lost so much. And the main event couldn't really have gotten worse. Obviously, Demetrius Johnson is a top fighter, but Chris Carriasso has no charisma, no sort of adulation from the fans. The fans don't like the guy. He's a decent fighter, but he hasn't related to fans, and it's just not going to sell very well because neither has Demetrius really.
Yeah, so I think both of these cards are really going to be hurting over this change here. It's kind of unfortunate. This was the UFC's biggest card of the year, and it's sad to see it go down like this. And it also affects Alexander Gustafsson as well because we mentioned him earlier, but he's upset that the Daniel Cormier fight with John Jones was immediately rebooked instead of him getting the title shot that he was originally slotted for. And I think this is a very good point by him. Daniel Cormier was stepping in to take his place off of an injury for that date. Now that that fight isn't happening on that date and it's being moved back, maybe there should have been a conversation as to whether if Alex should get that shot as opposed to Daniel. I don't know if that conversation was had, but it's definitely a good point brought up by him. Alex has already said that he's going to wait for his title shot and not pick any more fights. But Dana White has gone on record and said that he thinks Anthony Johnson should be next for Alexander Gustafsson. So that is a crazy idea. I mean, think about that. Alex can go from being in the actual title picture to easily getting knocked out um, by Johnson if they were to face at some event next year. I think it would be best for the UFC to kind of book, if they do get Alex to take another fight, book them both on the same card in case anyone gets injured or any other crazy situation has, so that they can reshuffle the event and keep everybody on that card and keep the title shot for January 3rd.
Yeah, it's just a shame. I think the fans want to see Cormier v. John Jones, so that fight has to happen. Gustafson's somewhat unlucky, but it's the fight game. Nothing's ever promised. He got injured. He lost his shot at the title. That's it. It happens. The fans want to fight with Daniel Cormier more now. So Daniel Cormier's going to get shot. And it's not like Daniel Cormier hasn't done enough to deserve the title shot. He clearly does as well. I think Gustafsson needs to just keep on fighting. He's a professional fighter. Why waste a year of your prime sitting out when you can keep on fighting and keep on earning money? If you're if you're the best in the world, you're going to be the best in the world in a year's time. Keep on fighting,
But see, it's easy for us to say that, but man, if he fought Anthony Johnson, that's not an easy fight at all. Especially not when with Anthony throwing like those haymakers that he throws that just kind of like knock years off of people's lives. Like I don't think that that's an easy fight for Alex to win in any shape or form. Like I don't know, man. If maybe not taking any fights is the right way for him to go. But if the UFC tries to pressure him back in the face of Anthony Johnson, that may be the last time we see him in the title shot hunt at that point in time.
But you see, the UFC aren't forcing him back into fight Anthony Johnson. The thing is, he's a professional fighter and he's contracted to the UFC. The guy needs to fight. It's his job. If you said to your employment, you said, I'm not going to work because I want to do this project, they tell you that, to go find another job. At the end of the day, he's contracted to the UFC. He needs to fight. Just because a fight got pulled doesn't mean he can sit on the sidelines. It just devalues him, I think, as a fighter. I think he needs to keep on fighting and keep in the fans' heads.
Yeah, definitely. I think one thing I think I like out of the situation already is the way Alexander is immediately talking. Like he's been doing more and more talking over the last couple months. But once this situation came out, he immediately took to Twitter, and the story about him and his trainer being pissed off was out there. So it's good to see him talking and doing more to get his name out there. So it was still a long way off, but it's a sticky situation, and I hope that he does hang back and not fight. But if he's placed in there against Anthony Johnson, A, I wouldn't mind seeing that fight, and B, I wouldn't be surprised if he lost it as well.
What will happen is he'll be paired up against Ryan Bader. It's a fight that's very winnable for him, and it's a low risk fight, but it keeps him active. The UFC will most likely do that. That's what I see happening.
Well, I mean, like I said, Dana White has gone on record and saying that he thinks Johnson is the next guy for him. But we'll see what happens down the line. What do you think? Have you seen the story that came out about Mark Bocek's comments about retirement?
Yeah, I read it. It was very interesting. A lot of it made sense, but the comments he made about the women's division, it sounds a lot like sour grapes. It sounds like he's just upset that he's not getting the attention that he should have had during his career. But at the end of the day, it just didn't work out for me. He was never the most marketable guy. Whereas some points I do agree with. Like he did say what was true was the fact that some women fighters are getting co-main event fights that do not deserve them, and that is very true. But for the most part, I think the UFC has fairly marketed the women's division.
Hold on a second. I think he does have a point in some ways though. And it's not necessarily inexperienced women's fighter because there's two sides to this conversation. First, one, the UFC needs as many fighters as they possibly can to keep all these cards booked. You obviously see that they're stretching themselves as thin as possible with having all of these events going on in multiple locations almost every weekend. So we see why they maybe want to bring in some other women fighters who aren't as skilled as others. But at the same time, most of these cards are still all male cards. Like how many cards have occurred where there's been more than two women's fights? I don't think there's been any yet. And we went a good portion of this year where we didn't see any women's fights at all. So for him to say that, again, maybe he feels like he didn't get the attention that he deserved, and I use that in air quotes. But the UFC is at a point where they need all the fighters, male and female, that they can get. Unfortunately for the women, um, some of those fighters may be less experienced just based off of a numbers figure. And right now, seeing him retire and making these comments, it's an interesting conversation to be had. But I don't think he'll ever win that debate.
No, I don't think you will either, because just as we spoke about the UFC card in Macau, it's the same situation, but with men. There's a lot of guys that don't deserve to be fighting on that card as well. It's not a gender-specific problem; it's just a industry problem in general.
Yeah, it's definitely an industry problem as well. Do you think anybody? Honestly, I think no one's even going to kind of like respond to his comments because it's kind of just like him blowing hot air at this point in time.
Yeah, I think no one's really is taking much heed of his comments, but it is interesting. He brought up the PED, which we've talked about so much, but he also brought up the brain damage issues, which is becoming more and more valid concern for fighters.
And that you said that now because Christoph Sosinski, he actually just recently retired, and he's citing memory loss as the reason why he's walking away from the sport. I don't think he's fought in 2 years or so. And to hear him say, that he's losing parts of his memory, I've actually heard other fighters say this as well too, that they've experienced like this point in time where they just don't remember certain details, and that is that's pretty scary to see. We hear boxers talk about that, we hear football players talk about this, and now it's kind of coming out in MMA. So this is going to be an interesting time to see what happens to a lot of these fighters that we've enjoyed watching for so many years that are now going to begin retiring. Like, what is their health going to be like over this point in time?
I think this first wave or second wave of retirees are going to suffer the worst. They've took a lot of hard shots, and they're still from the generation where sparring hard was necessary to get better. But I think there's been a conscious decision by a lot of the top trainers to move away from that. John Hackelman, who trained Chuck Liddell for years, he's recently said that he doesn't believe that hard sparring is necessary for fighters' development. And obviously, that's an industry-wide concern. And Robbie Lawler's often said that he doesn't even spar anymore, really. So I think it's a concern for the fighters who've already fought, but moving forward, I think coaches are a lot more aware of the concerns.
Yeah, so I'm sad. I'm sad to see him walking away. Well, not sad to see him walking away, but it's just unfortunate to see him walking away in this state. And it'll be unfortunate to see what's happening to some of these other guys coming forward as well too over the years. Like a Diego Sanchez, what's he going to be like when he finally retires? He can hardly talk now, and he's still fighting as often as he possibly can. So
yeah, it's just crazy. I listened to an interview with Diego recently, and he didn't sound as bad as usual, which is a good sign. But there are some fighters, Chuck Liddell isn't the same guy. Just listen to that guy talk. He's not the same guy as he was in 2005, 2004. It's a noticeable difference. We've had Gary Goodridge. Man, he's ruined, His brain is not there anymore. It's going to happen. It's going to keep happening with guys. It's going to be sad to see as we move forward.
Okay. Then this the last news bit we are going to touch on this week was the capture of War Machine. We talked briefly about the situation that he found himself in and he was on the run from the law, I think for a week. At the time, he was captured yesterday, I believe. There's actually a story I just saw that he was tasered by the cops. That they had to taser him before bringing him down. Um, so that kind of sucks. But it's 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 a sad situation. We don't know necessarily what the facts are. There's pictures coming out now of Christy Mack and stuff like that. I've seen over the last week. I can't even really look at them. It's a sad situation, and I hope that we get down to the truth and that the punishments that are levied fit the crime. If it is a true situation, but it's definitely tough to see that happening. This and then the Dustin Poirier story as well too about him training his dog to attack his wife. It's definitely a dangerous situation that the sport doesn't want to get attributed. With these fighters who, even though they may not be on rosters or they may not be active fighters at the time, you don't want that stigma of breeding this type of action. So it was good to see the organizations react quickly as soon as the situation came out and have them cut War Machine. And I hope we don't see these stories anymore. We see them in sports often, just because of situations like the Ray Rice situation. But I hope that we don't see them as often in MMA, and I hope that it isn't held against the sport in the way it could be.
Yeah, I'll just correct you quickly. It was Josh Grisby with the pit bulls, not Dustin Poirier.
Oh man, yeah, you're right.
Just
Yeah,
in
I'm
case
sorry.
Dustin Poirier tries to sue us.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah, I'm sorry. I was thinking, because I was thinking of their fight back in the day. My fault. But yeah, definitely. It was Josh Grisby, not Dustin. You're right.
but yeah, as you said, War Machine thing is very interesting. It's just shown how social media works has been very interesting too. Just from a personal standpoint, I've been really interested in seeing how media commentators go into two camps. There's the in group and the out group. There's a group that are, War Machine is a terrible human being who tried to kill her, and then there's the other group who completely denied that anything was wrong and stuff. There's not many people who like I believe, that it's innocent until proven guilty. The guy has to face trial. The truth isn't out there yet completely, and it's not going to be out there until it goes to court and we see what's happened. She obviously
Yeah.
got fed up, but we don't know anything other than the fact that she got fed up. We don't know anything that led to it. We don't know anything that happened during it. Until now, until there's a trial, I really don't think there's much need for me to comment on it, because at the end of the day, the truth will come out eventually, and speculating is just going to keep on spreading this story around, and that's not what the sport needs right now.
Yeah, it's definitely unfortunate because we've seen situations like this hurt other sports in the past. Like again, like I'll bring up the Ray Rice situation. When the video came out and the UFC suspended. I'm not UFC. Goodness, I'm getting names all over the place. And the NFL, um, turned around and suspended Ray Rice for only 2 games. A lot of women's rights groups came out against the NFL because they felt like that wasn't enough when based against the evidence that was shown through the video. So we've seen that people do get upset over these types of situations, and I hope that it doesn't hit backlash for the sport as a whole, especially as they continue to try to fight to get into New York and other big markets
Yeah.
like that.
Yeah, that's very true, but I don't think it's going to have a long-term impact on the sport. When O.J. Simpson allegedly killed his wife, that didn't affect the NFL. I think War Machine fought twice in the UFC about 6 or 7 years ago. He's not a UFC fighter. He's a fighter who once fought in the UFC. There's a big difference. I think the sport of MMA has gotten to the stage now where stuff like this won't affect it anymore. If this was the dark ages of MMA, this would be a huge thing, but right now it's not. I think the UFC has come to a level where it's separate from its athletes. Its athletes don't define the brand so much anymore. The brand is already existing. I think the UFC won't suffer too much from this.
Yeah, I definitely agree with you on that. And let's look at some of the questions that we were sent from today's card. I think the first one I want to ask was someone sent us in a question on our bet between Henderson and Dos Anjos, and it's a good one. What if Dos Anjos wins 2 rounds? Let's say he wins rounds 1 and 2, and then gets stopped in round 3. Who wins the bet? Do I win because he won 2 rounds, or do you win because he got stopped? I
He
think
got
I win.
stopped. He got stopped. I definitely won.
No, no, I think I would because people get stopped on food stoppages all the time. too. Not necessarily. That doesn't mean somebody's getting the doors blown off of them. It just means that they just got beat.
It depends on the stoppage, really. If he gets knocked out cold, he's been dominated. But if he gets stopped on a cut, it's different.
I'm not agreeing with you there at all. At all. In way, shape, or form. If Dos Anjos takes like a right hand and goes down and then gets pounded out, that's not getting dominated. That's getting stopped, and I win the bet because he won 2 rounds.
There's no more domination than being put into unconsciousness, my friend.
Oh my goodness. All right, we need to figure this out before Wednesday. But no matter what happens, I'm still winning the bet because I think he's going to take maybe 2 rounds.
Yeah, we'll see. We'll see.
All right, great. So again, so what are you working on for MMAratings.net this week?
I might well work on a piece on Benson Henderson. It's going to be very interesting. I love watching Benson Henderson fight. It's going to be nice seeing him finish. I said finish Dos Anjos. And I'll work on a piece about that. And I might perhaps work on a piece about Michael Bisping too. How about you?
Yeah, I'm definitely got my fights to make piece coming out. I have one that's in the queue as well about the effect that UFC 178 losing their main event is having on both 177 and 178. And I'll probably do something about the about the way that the UFC is booking the event in Macau and how that kind of helps them, even though the card doesn't present any real value to mainstream fight fans at this point in time.
That sounds good, man.
Good. So again, this is Raphael Garcia with Roy Billington talking about MMA on the MMA Ratings Podcast. So you can check us out next week when I am laughing in Roy's face when I win our bet.
We'll see.
All right, man. Have a great weekend.
You too.
Bye.